and welcome. We'll get started in just a moment. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Our ninth module today, so I'm super excited to have you all here and to be wrapping up our official the official 9 parts of our module that we have been started since April. So you all have been on a journey with us, and so we appreciate you still being here towards the end. A couple of announcements. This is my excitement emoji. We're here. Module 9, we're at the very end. You all have completed so much through this. And so today we have our science policy and advocacy engagement at the local level. And then our 10th and final module will be our final pitch competition, and we'll get to celebrate and have some special guest judges with us. A few announcements before I hand it over to Karina, who's going to be our moderator and facilitate our discussion today. The only 2 assignments that we have remaining are the following 2 here, the writing piece round 2. So it's just a revision of your original one, going off the feedback and comments you got the first round. And then our new one will be the public engagement, which we'll talk a little bit more as we go through and have some examples for you to share out for you to do after our discussion today. So reminder of our pitch competition, we did notify our 10 finalists via email. They were really, really awesome to watch and to go through. So thank you all who submitted. And it was honestly very tough to get to that top 10. There were a lot of you who were really close. And so we hope that you're all there to help celebrate and wrap up the end of the 10 modules that we've gone through and to cheer on our finalists. And that will be 2 Mondays from now. Just to recap, and you'll have this in an email that will be shared out with you after the module as well. But for the feedback, for the 1-pagers, the elevator pitches, and the power maps have all been sent to you. So check those. For the 1-pagers and the elevator pitches, we sent those comments via email, and for the power maps, you got comments directly on your submissions as well as on that assignments sheet. Some additional feedback was provided there for overall of your submissions. So feel free to check that out, and also feel free to look at comments from other folks. If ones that were stellar and you want to take a look at some samples, this is a great space and community to be able to learn from each other. And so I encourage you to look at other people's submissions for those power maps especially. The writing piece, round 2, and again, you'll have this, it's due technically August 16. I already see a ton of submissions in there, so we'll get started on those, as well as the public engagement plan is going to be August 19. Both of those we're going to send out to external reviewers, professionals, and experts in those areas, and they'll be able to provide you with feedback. So I know 1 or 2 of you have already reached out for extension, and we can give some, but because we're sending them out to external reviewers, we kind of need those by the deadline for these ones. Okay. All right. I think other than that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Karina.
Thanks, Lauren. All right. Super excited to be here with everyone today to talk about science policy and advocacy at the local level. So far, we've mostly been focused on science policy and advocacy at the federal level, but local engagement is just as important, and a lot can actually get done at that level, whether it's state or city. And science policy and advocacy can address community-specific challenges in a more directed and swift way at the local level than it might be able to at the federal level, really allowing for change to cater to the community's needs and really speak the language of those local communities. And engaging in science policy and advocacy at the local level during graduate school and as postdocs is really important to help bridge that gap between science and local communities, particularly to help grow an informed and engaged public and to gain skills as PhD students and postdocs, so that you can continue building your careers in science policy and continue your involvement. So while I was in graduate school in California, I actually joined my local League of Women Voters, so the Orange County chapter. And it is a national organization that is nonpartisan, and it really allowed me to get involved in policy at the state and city levels. I actually got to help my chapter advise, I got to help advise my local chapter on climate change and the importance of environmental justice, as well as participate in meetings with local and state representatives to advocate for league positions, such as expanding voter rights. And I also got to communicate with candidates for local and state level elections to help create an informed electorate. So these were really critical experiences for me as I'm pursuing a career in science policy, and they really helped me advocate for the issues that affected my local community in graduate school. So today we have experts with experience and careers in science policy and advocacy at that local level, and they will be here to help us better understand its value and how you all as trainees in whatever level of your career that you're at can get involved. So with that, I welcome Taylor Spicer, who is the Managing Director at Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally, or ESOL for short, and we'll be dropping in that link into the chat. Taylor, thank you so much for being here with us today, and I'll hand it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you. Of course, my dog Fig just decided to join the conversation. I'm hoping he'll remain quiet. Okay, one moment. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
We welcome all fur animals to be in the session as well. I saw Karina's cat as we were prepping in the back too. Feel free to let them join in.
Yes, he likes to be a part of everything. So thanks for your patience. All right. Well, thank you all for the invitation to be a part of this session. I am really excited to share a little bit of a primer, really just to get you thinking about many ways that you might want to explore local engagement and get us started in the conversation. So I'm going to just present sort of a broad sweeping set of slides that I hope get us in the right mindset. But before that, just want to tell you that, yes, I'm the Managing Director for Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. We are a national 501c3. It's been around since 2017 as an idea and 2019 as a 501c3. So really what we're trying to do is increase local civic engagement in its many forms by people with background in STEM. And we do that in a couple ways. Can get into this a little bit more, but really are trying to raise awareness generally about these ways to get engaged, help folks build the skill sets and networks that you need to do this work, because it is very relational, and then also find opportunities for other resources and connections that help in this journey, because it is not one thing that you do that results in local civic engagement. It is a commitment over time to really see through the things that you want for your community. And we are surprisingly an almost entirely volunteer run and led organization. So we have about 40 volunteers involved right now. I'm the only part-time staff member. We're always looking for more people who see the value of the mission and want to develop some skills through this work. You will hopefully notice one of your own. I'm sorry, Cherry, to call you out, but you are one of my favorite people, and you are such an awesome part of the ESOL team. And so we'd welcome anyone else who's interested. But really the background of why this organization formed is because we in 2018 or 2017 launched a survey to find out, what do people see as the barriers for local civic engagement. The first one probably won't be surprising. Time is an issue, especially if you choose another full-time career that is not about local engagement. But then others just didn't necessarily know how to get involved. And so really ESOL set forth to try to address some of these issues and barriers. Sorry, my slides keep having a little delay. But really we saw that there's a discrepancy by the level of government, that people felt that they didn't have as much knowledge about what was going on. And some of that's understandable, right? We often hear a lot in the news cycle that is very national, and you really sometimes have to seek out more of the localized stories. So we are trying to raise some of those up, and folks, again, self-reported sort of a gap between wanting to get involved, but not necessarily taking the actions. And, we can attribute that probably to the time and knowledge gaps that were reported. So this is some of our backstory. And like Karina shared in her opening remarks, really, there's a lot that happens at the local level, and more than possibly at the federal level, decisions are made by the people who show up in the room at the city council meetings, at the town hall. Folks who build those relationships, show up in those spaces, often have a disproportionate impact on localized decisions. There is a lot to say about US federalism and how that shifts some of the power between federal and local decision making. I encourage you to explore that a little bit if you're interested. A lot of it now is connected to national parties and how they work to influence different levels of decision making for political purposes, but it's not to say that those of us who have other agendas that may not fit into a political party cannot also be a part of that decision making process. So, want to take a second, make sure we're all coming from the same understanding of what local government can include. So for most, you might think of the state level government, and this is just the California example visually because of where y'all might be located, but the state, not surprisingly, I think most of us will know that there is a governor's office of the executive branch. There is a state legislature that in most cases is bicameral, meaning it has the House of Representatives and the Senate. But there are also state agencies and departments that employ a lot of people with STEM backgrounds. There are also advisory boards and commissions that you can often apply to and become appointed to by another civic leader in your government. And there are also specific working groups for a purpose. A lot right now might be focused on AI, and local government could be an example. But really, these are opportunities for folks who don't want to be the one working at the state agency, but you want to find a way to use your expertise. You might want to explore boards and commissions or working groups at the state level. And so when we zoom in from there, often we'll find a county level government that also has a similar structure, departments and agencies of staff, county commissioners, which are elected, public health commissions. These are examples, election commissions. So definitely a hot topic this year. Most of us have county level election commissions that have sometimes volunteer boards that oversee the work of staff members. And similarly, counties can also have volunteer advisory boards and commissions to help inform the work they do. At the city level, the mayor's office, of course, is one most people know. And a mayor is often the figurehead, the public persona of the city. But there is someone who is working in the mayor's office that might actually be someone you want to connect with more. The city manager is the one who is often overseeing how departments and agencies are employing the work that the city council is approving. So city managers are often really powerful people to get to know. And again, there are elected, departments and agencies of staffers. And similarly, there are voluntary opportunities often at the city level as well. So neighborhood level can look like it can look very different across the nation, across your states, but here are a few examples of what we would consider neighborhood level engagement, sort of organizing groups. You might have a neighborhood commission. For where I live, sorry, I should have said that. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. We have neighborhood planning units that are actually organized by our city. And so they are referred to for their who they represent, which are their neighbors in their neighborhood. We also could have community response teams that could be activated again by local government departments. And then universities and colleges, we consider to be sort of a neighborhood level opportunity for local engagement because of the footprint so many campuses have, the work that is connected to community. So there's just a lot that can happen through higher education campuses. And finally, there are other types of organizing levels. School districts is a well-known one. Parks and recreation districts sometimes can fit into one of the other divisions, but can also stand alone in some places. Utility districts. So for us in Georgia, we call it the Public Service Commission. They are making decisions for the state about utilities and, in our case, broadband as well. Water boards are another example. So you can see that local governments really entail a lot of activity, a lot of people, a lot of folks making decisions, and a lot of opportunities. And I'd argue that at every one of these levels, you'll see some combination of STEM topics being discussed, legislation being made, rules being made, and programs and incentives, rebates, all these things being used to implement the guiding policies that our different levels of government have chosen to enact. So there is so much, again, that we can explore together at the local level. And that's really what ESOL is trying to help folks with STEM backgrounds see, is that you are absolutely an asset, and there are so many ways that you can employ what you've learned. So we put the ways that you might want to engage into bigger buckets just to help us organize. You might want to advocate, you might want to serve, and you might want to provide expert guidance. And each can be a different type of commitment in regard to time and, of course, activity. I've included some personal examples, and I'm just going to share a little bit about them so that we can talk about them if you're interested. But in regard to advocacy, this is an example of a local group that formed because of pedestrian deaths by people driving cars. And so this is me here in this with this pink sign following what grassroots organizers told me would be effective. So I showed up, and we are now a part of a group that's called Calm Decatur and are working with our city councilors for some changes. In regard to service, and a couple other examples, but this is one of those fun new construction photos from a site of a nonprofit that I'm on the board for. And expert guidance. This is actually a fun example of a bunch of groups, networks coming together to provide public comments to the Public Service Commission, that group I told you about. So this is actually a student from an environmental sciences program that came during a school day with her peers to present alongside healthcare professionals, climate scientists, and advocate for the energy system that they want for our state. And want to point out that ESOL has really specific resources for each type of activity you might want to look into that I listed. There are, of course, others, but just another example, this is me delivering public comments just as a resident of my county to the Board of Elections. There's a lot going on here in Georgia. Service, again, just kind of followed the needs of the neighborhood. We have a Friends of the Parks program where you can get funding for your parks and then volunteers show up and kind of do the work that needs to happen for restoration. I have a background in sustainability, so this type of work is really appealing to me because it allows me to employ that knowledge to restore a really important part of our community and natural infrastructure. And expert guidance. This is an example, again, from my sustainability work. I was helping to implement a pollinator protection policy, and so became quite aware of the breadth of applications of a group of pesticides called neonicotinoids, and our city was trying to piece together its Be City Atlanta resolution. And so I joined this task force to help inform that, to ensure that that group of pesticides was included in the guidance and eliminating anything pre-treated, any contractors that may bring them in to the spaces that our city has. So those are some examples, and I shared that I will pass on these slides at the end, so all these links you'll have if you're interested. And I'd be remiss not to just raise up more of the ways to get involved this election year. In particular, these won't be surprising, but we do have a couple examples of other folks who became poll workers. I've also done that. If you're interested, happy to share about that. I've also been a poll watcher. And then we've talked to Ballotpedia and made sure it was okay to share their sample ballot tool so that you can, yes, vote for whoever you want in national, federal elections, but also before you go into the polling place, know what local races and ballot measures may be on your ballot so that you can make your informed decisions. And I included Ballotpedia here because it's a national tool, but your county should also have sample ballots available to you. So yes, please participate this election cycle. And that's my quick overview, and I have more to share if anyone's interested in ESAL, and lots of personal examples to dive into if you're interested. So thank you for letting me have these few moments.
Thank you so much, Taylor. That was great and definitely sets us up well for our discussion. We have time for 1 to 2 questions if students have questions. If not, I can ask a couple on the trainees' behalf before we move on to our next part of the module.
There was one in the chat. It says, does ESAL work with all divisions levels that you mentioned? Don't know if you specifically addressed that yet.
Thank you. Yes, we are trying to better connect more local officials, local staffers of all levels of government. We don't really discriminate. We really want to find folks who want to work with people with backgrounds in STEM and form direct relationships with them so that we can be connectors. So yes, we are definitely trying to work at all levels. Of course, some are just harder to find that in, to make that kind of connection, but state level is quite common, city level, county sometimes, but neighborhood level is more, I'd say, represented in campus level type of work. So yes.
Great, thank you, Taylor. Another question, just quickly before we move on, is you mentioned advocacy, and I'm sure we'll get more into it, but often scientists are sort of dissuaded from having an advocacy role. Is there a way that ESAL prefers for scientists to get involved if they're doing sort of an advocacy event, or is there a correct way to be an advocate as a scientist?
I'm sure every one of us would have a nuanced answer to this, but I think what we would say is that folks with backgrounds in STEM are seeking out and following what evidence tells you. So yes, how you apply that evidence may be could be in a partisan way, could be in a way to further an agenda. However, what we're starting with is based in the scientific method, a way of practicing that allows you to reproduce the same, hopefully, or reproduce results so that you can assert it as an evidence-based solution. So that is, I think, the grounding for why it's important for people with backgrounds in STEM to show up, because that evidence is not inherently a part of the conversation. So it's not to say you know the solution, but you have part of the answer for that solution. And if you're not at that table to share it and again provide that background, it may not be represented, and policies that could be harmful or just not well informed could be a part of what is adopted instead.
Great. Thank you so much, Taylor. So now I will introduce the rest of our panelists for today's module. Thanks, Lauren. So we have Shannon Kelly, who is the Director of Trainings at the Scholars Strategy Network. We've got Geoffrey Hunt, who is the Director of Strategy and Partnerships at Connecting Genetics to Climate. And we can now move into our panelist discussion. So we'll start with our panelists introducing themselves. Obviously, Taylor has already introduced herself, but if you all wouldn't mind telling us a little bit more about your role within your organization and maybe a sentence about engagement at the local level and why that really matters, kind of building off of what Taylor said to lead us into our broader discussion. Shannon, we can start with you.
Yeah, sorry, thanks. Yeah, thanks. So hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Kelly. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Trainings, like was mentioned, at the Scholar Strategy Network. So Scholar Strategy Network, or SSN, is very similar to ESAL in that it's a national nonprofit organization. We aim to bring together scholars, policy actors. We also work a lot with journalists with the goal of promoting the use of research evidence in policy. We're fundamentally a network of researchers. So we currently have just over 1,900 members across the country, and they are fundamentally in local chapters. So we have 37 different chapters, which are all over the US. So we work primarily at the local level through our chapters. So my role at SSN is to help create and run trainings that really fundamentally have the goal of giving scholars the skills that they need and the knowledge that they need to be able to effectively use their research and expertise to improve policy. I've been at SSN for about 2 years, and before that, I had just completed my PhD in psychology. So during grad school, I was studying the biological bases of childhood mental illnesses. And then just to tell a little bit about how I got from that to SSN, I essentially started out by, my interest in science policy started out as a way of helping myself improve my ability to communicate research to non-academic audiences, probably in a similar state that a lot of you all are in. I found that I, wasn't getting training in that through my doctoral program. And so I was kind of seeking out opportunities outside of my doctoral program to find better ways to do that so that my research would kind of break out of the very small bubble of other people who studied very, very similar things to me. I wanted to have a broader impact than that. And so through kind of word of mouth, I learned about an organization called the Research to Policy Collaboration. I don't know if you all have maybe mentioned that already, but it's an organization that's very similar to SSN, but they specifically work at the federal level. So they work to connect researchers to congressional offices. So I did an internship with them while I was finishing my dissertation. And I essentially learned through that internship that I found, helping other researchers broaden the impacts of their research, essentially more rewarding than doing research myself. So that led to the decision to kind of leave the academic career path that I was on. And I started looking for non-academic jobs in science policy, and that's how I landed at SSN. And then I was also asked to just mention something briefly about engagement at the local level. So as I mentioned, SSN, we engage a lot through at the state and city level, primarily through our chapters. And, something that I think I've learned through that experience working with our chapters is that creating relationships with people in the policy sphere, I think, as Taylor was already mentioning, is a really critical point of being effective in terms of your advocacy efforts or just helping to inform policy more broadly. And your ability to form lasting relationships and also become a known resource in your community and to policymakers, I think is so much easier at the local level. There's obviously a lot more competition, but very few people kind of rise to the level of being known as the go-to person. at the national level on a specific topic, but you can be that person at your state or city level, you know, I think with a lot less luck necessarily. Like it's easier to kind of be lucky enough to be that person. And being that go-to person allows you to have a really big impact then at your level. So yeah, I think that's me, and I'll hand it off to, I think Geoffrey's next.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Hunt, currently working at the program called Connecting Genetics to Climate. And we are about a little over a year old. So this program is aiming to create conversations around genetic technologies, biotechnologies that have the potential to address climate change, either in the mitigation or adaptation stage. It's something where we are focusing on education and awareness, but trying to do that with lots of different audiences. So the relevant audience, obviously, for the discussion we're having today is with local communities, but we also do a lot of work that's sort of scientist to scientist, scientist to policymakers. But really a lot of climate solutions are going to be place-based, and we hear about sort of the big ones, you know, cutting down on emissions, gas companies, all of that stuff. But a lot of these strategies, especially ones that are biologically oriented, are going to be taking place in communities, and they're going to be affecting people. So if you breed a mosquito that is going to produce sterile offspring, is it okay to just release that into a neighborhood? What does the neighborhood think about that? What is that going to have in terms of long-term impact and short-term impact? And these are the kinds of things a lot of times when we're thinking about how the scientific process is undertaken that aren't really considered until sort of the very end. And I think the example I always sort of go to is with the COVID vaccines. So much work went into producing those within a year. It's a miracle that we got those things within a year. And still, we saw the high levels of hesitancy of people to use it because there was no engagement around what the process was. And that is not uncommon, unfortunately. The process of science is not built up to really take inputs from sort of the end recipients. And so what we're trying to do is think about ways where we can have engagement with audiences at various stages of the research process, especially with these technologies that are going to be implemented with a hope for addressing climate change, which I think a lot of data show that there's increasing amounts of concern or awareness or interest in participating in. And so my role, there's 3 of us, well, 2.5 of us on the team. And so we all sort of share a little bit of everything. But my sort of defined role is really coming up with our strategic directions and sort of overall strategy for what we're trying to do as a program, how we're trying to implement best practices in public engagements, and how that connects to the work that's being done not only at the scientific level, but also at the policy level and also at the community level. Again, a lot of the work that is done starts, especially when we're talking about science engagement, starts with like, oh, a scientist has something that they're working on, and then they want to explain it to X audience. But very rarely does a scientist sit there and listen to a community or an audience say like, hey, this is an issue that we need solved. What are you going to do about it? And so when we're thinking about engagement, it's something I always like to bring up is it's not just like me talking to you and that's engagement. It's me listening to you. And sometimes I don't say anything. Sometimes I'm not the right person to say something. So that's a lot of how I think about engagement. And I know the focus here is more on sort of advocacy and policy, which is different a little bit than the work that I work on. But the same principles certainly apply. And certainly this idea of listening and responding rather than, I mean, it's good to be proactive, obviously, in this world, but figuring out sort of what that balance is really important for effective engagement. So I'll just sort of present that as an overview. My background is similar. I have a PhD in molecular biology. I've worked for professional societies and nonprofits since graduate school with this really high focus on engagement. I actually started off doing a science policy fellowship, but have transitioned away from sort of the policy side more to sort of the community aspect side. So very brief overview, but happy to get into more discussion.
Great, thank you all. So we'll get into our broader discussion now, and trainees, as drop questions in the chat, jump in. But I did all of you sort of mentioned how to get involved at the local level, and I appreciated what Jeff was saying in terms of the skill set that's required to sort of start to get your foot in the door, start to build those trust relationships. We've talked a lot about science communication and ways to present your own science and tell your story. We've worked on pitches, but are there other skill sets, kind of like the ones that Jeff was mentioning in terms of listening, that we should also be working on, and how do you recommend that those get worked on along with those other science communication skills? Taylor, if you want to chime in, we can go around.
Sure. I was trying to pull up a great resource we have written by Nancy Holt, who ran Science for New York for a while. She has a good tip list for this topic. But I think really the way I think of this is, yes, how you walk into a room matters, but what matters more is all the work that you did before you got there. So how you can listen, of course, through one-on-one conversations with folks in your community, but also just following along with their media, get on their newsletters and actually read them, and read a lot of on your own. There's a lot to learn from other organizers, people in social sciences, young people, people who've been a part of movements. There's just a lot that is coming into a space that may be sort of more traditionally a place of power, like a Capitol building, that may feel very uncomfortable, but the history and the reality is that that is also a place where you belong. And so sort of fortifying yourself with certain historical background, the movement theory, whatever it is you want to be a part of, there's so much out there that can help bolster you for when you walk into that room and really deliver what you came there to deliver. And I think it can be similar for folks that might be, again, outside of that traditional place of power. So maybe in community-based organizations, nonprofits, but I think that takes a longer time to really know who you are, why you are showing up. You need to genuinely understand your purpose. And like Jeff was saying, listening, but listening before you get there. Do your research, learn what folks in those communities, organizations have been talking about, what they're advocating for, so that you aren't coming in as someone who has your own agenda and that's all you know. There's so much more that you can do before you enter that room.
Is it okay if we just jump in? Great. So yeah, I second everything that Taylor said, being as, knowledgeable about, especially what's happening in the policy sphere around your topic before you go into the room is great. But also I think, going into whatever is your advocacy, type of event, but especially if you're actually speaking directly to policymakers or other policy actors, like essentially what Karina said with listening, asking good questions and being flexible are really important. You may come into, especially if you're having a one-on-one conversation with a policymaker, you may come in with, and I do recommend that you do come in with ideas of what you want to talk about, and they may take a left turn and, suddenly you're talking about a slightly different topic. And your ability to kind of roll with that will, ultimately mean the difference between, a meeting that ends cordially, like, sorry, I guess I'm not helpful to you today, and that's fine, we'll talk another time. Or, oh, this actually was a really effective meeting and conversation. I think that your ability to be flexible in the moment really determines the difference between that. But I guess kind of a caveat to that is I do think it's also really important to have in mind where your limitations or boundaries are. So think ahead of time before you start doing your advocacy work, you know, what you want to consider part of your expertise. Because policymakers will oftentimes want to kind of push you outside of just talking about, you know, what you study. That may not be necessarily the piece of information that's most relevant to them in that moment. But if you feel comfortable talking about other research that you are knowledgeable about because it's broadly in your topic area, but maybe not something that you've ever studied yourself or written anything about, if you do feel comfortable speaking to those kinds of things, please do so. You know, try to be as helpful to that person that you're speaking to as possible. But also, you know, you do want to know your boundaries. And if it is something that's outside of, you know, what you consider yourself to be knowledgeable about, then it's always okay to say, you know, sorry, I'm actually not the person to speak to on that, or I don't know the data well enough on that. Maybe you have another person in mind that you could offer as another, you know, researcher that they could speak to on that topic. So yeah, just being flexible, being, you know, because the conversation may go very different directions. And yeah, and if you do feel comfortable kind of thinking more broadly about your expertise, I certainly recommend that, you know, rather than just going in with your research and your ask. Also, absolutely do take that opportunity to ask, you know, for what kind of changes you want to see, but try to be flexible in terms of listening to them about what really needs to happen for whatever policy effort to be effective, because they're the experts in the room on that piece. And try to be as helpful as you can to meet that policy efforts, again, within the bounds of your expertise.
Jeff, do you have any other thoughts to offer on skills other than sort of the traditional SciComm skills that we talk about in terms of ways to be helpful and engaging locally?
I think they pretty much covered it. The only thing I would add is just passion. I mean, find the thing that you're passionate about. If you don't have passion for it, it's going to be really hard to be a good advocate.
Excellent. Thank you. We do have a question in the chat. The question is from Emma Rose, and they're asking, how often do your respective organizations try and incorporate the opinion and expertise of local tribes? If this has been successful, what have been some of the strategies to build trust with these communities?
Start, or would someone else like to go?
Go ahead, Taylor.
This time. Right, I was just starting to type this in the chat. In 2022, ESOL worked with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. Some of y'all might be familiar with them. Their acronym is ITEP. So for us, working through a professional network was more aligned with our assets, our access, and honestly comfort level, having a group that really is sort of a liaison between a lot of us and tribal groups that they have in their membership. But we also have, since our founding days, have had someone who works with tribes in Alaska on our steering committee. She only recently rolled off, just to be a voice and ensuring that something like a JEDI commitment is not something that just sits on our website, but is something that we revisit often and use to inform how we create programs, how we make decisions about tracking members and demographic information. That's been an internal debate that we all feel differently about, because we're told by, let's say, funders that we should be doing something like that. But her perspective was really quite unique and different about the history of tracking Indigenous peoples and trying to use those metrics to change and affect how federal resources and other types of really just destructive choices about sort of overseeing how government is influencing Indigenous families and social networks. And so that was a history that I didn't necessarily, and I don't see represented in the nonprofit sector at large. We really are sort of bending to what we're told to track and report on. So a lot of great perspective.
Select another option. Okay.
Sorry. So those are a couple examples, and I'll stop there, and I'll include the series that we did in the chat.
Shannon, you were nodding your head earlier. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I can maybe just add a little bit. I haven't myself been terribly involved in this work at SSN, but the ways in which we have been most successful in working with tribes are through researchers who are typically members of those tribes. And so researchers who are then become members of SSN, and I think that this to some degree really is true for working with pretty much any specific community. But as a researcher, you do have, you know, a certain degree of kind of privilege broadly within the US. It is a little bit, I mean, I wouldn't say it's easy to necessarily get a policymaker's ear, but it is a little bit easier than, you know, other individuals from that community might have, be able to get their ear and be able to you know, make an argument that's effective to them. So we start by working with researchers and helping them get connected to policymakers. But then once they have the ear of a policymaker, helping them really use that opportunity to then bring other community members into that conversation, so that, you know, they're kind of acting as a step for these policymakers to then actually have a direct impact into policy as well, be able to communicate their experiences and their needs, et cetera. And so that has been how it's functioned most effectively for us at SSN for tribal communities as well. So yeah, I think that's all I have to add on that.
Thank you, Shannon and Taylor. We have another question in the chat. So student Jess is asking if you all have experienced any roadblocks or challenges in your initial public engagement efforts, and if so, what have they been and how did you overcome them? And I'd like to start with Jeff, since you've created some science wraps and you've created Days of Science where you've really engaged the local community, and I think that's a good place to start for that question in terms of roadblocks and challenges and how you overcame them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are philosophical challenges, and I think there are logistical challenges, and I think they are different yet overlapping. I'd say a big challenge is just funding and finding money to support what you actually want to do, and doing it in a way that it's not just, okay, we can throw something together just to have a presence or just to make it seem like we're doing something, but to have an actual impact. And that can be a real challenge depending on where you're working, who you're working for, and what you're trying to actually accomplish. So a lot of that comes from, a lot of the overcoming of that comes just with experience and relationships, and really making this work something that is of interest and is of import to your partners, to your collaborators, and to your target audiences. The philosophical level is one where you have to figure out who, you know, what it is you're trying to do, and what are you trying, how you will actually accomplish that. Sometimes your gaze, you know, out is too far for what your actual reach is. I think that's a good thing. I think it's good to have visions that are unattainable because it always keeps you wanting to do more. But then you also have to settle into reality and figure out what it is you actually can do. And then it's a challenge always in terms of who you are looking to work with, both on sort of the partner collaborator level and also on the audience level. And again, you know, we've all talked about this idea of sort of how you engage, how you have sort of a back and forth, how you sort of listen. And I think that's hard, especially coming from folks who are in an academic position, because your perspective is usually, I'm doing this thing, I really want to share it, or I really want to talk about it, or even it's not that specific thing, it's a specific field, and it's the same thing. And you have to sort of sometimes, rein that in a little bit if you're looking to actually have engagements in a way that's going to be effective. But I think a lot of this is just overcome by trial and error, and you just sort of learn what works best. Obviously, people who have been doing this, are doing this, and working with them. Partnerships are a great way to just, if nothing else, build relationships like Shannon and Taylor have mentioned, and then sort of going from there. And so it's really something that none of this is insurmountable. It's just your level of sort of patience to work through the process.
Thank you, Jeff. Taylor, would you like to go next?
Sure. I was just going to flag a few of those logistical challenges just because I think you may not be aware of them until you're really trying to get in the work. So there really are certain times of year where certain opportunities come along. And they're different for every state, for every municipality, but learning those time periods will really help you be effective and know when the thing you want to do can have a public forum. So maybe there is a time when you could provide testimony to a specific committee, maybe at the state level. There's another time of the year where local budgets are negotiated. And again, they're at different levels. So knowing when that happens for each level that you want to impact is important. There are times when it's great to meet with folks one-on-one. There are other times when they're going to be in session and they don't have time for that. And I will say another logistical challenge that I think a lot of the state policy fellowship programs encounter in real time is that the timeliness of research to inform the decisions of policymakers is very short during legislative sessions, especially. So there is a way in which our colleagues in those programs have learned that really that one pager, that one memo is what you can produce in a timely way and circulate it in time for it to be used for policy-making decisions. So there are, again, logistical challenges, but until you're in it, you may not even consider them when you're preparing your delivery of whatever it is you want to do. So just wanted to flag a few.
Thank you, Taylor. I think that also just goes back to what Jeff was saying in terms of funding. We just don't think about that when we're excited about something or putting it together, and then you end up hitting those kinds of roadblocks that you just didn't think about beforehand. Shannon, anything to add?
Yeah, I might just add a little bit. Definitely, I'd say that the biggest barriers that especially we experience in connecting researchers with policymakers is, timing. Definitely just seconding what all that Taylor just said. Timing is a big one because researchers and policymakers work on completely different timelines. And then communication. I know that you all have talked about that a lot, but just very different styles of communication. And I think those two are the biggest ones, but they kind of together are more broadly under an umbrella of like cultural differences between scientists and people in the policy sphere. So in case anyone's interested, there's a great researcher named Karen Bogenschneider at the University of Wisconsin who named this, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, the community dissonance theory. But it's basically this fundamental idea that many or most of these barriers to getting evidence research informed policy made and in practice is these cultural differences between scientists and policymakers. And that, that essentially is like why there are differences in communication, there are differences in timelines, there are differences in broader goals of what we're doing here. There are even, because of the different cultures that don't intermix often enough, there are stereotypes about each other that causes barriers as well. Like we may have thoughts about what policymakers do and that they don't care enough about research, et cetera. Well, policymakers have sometimes stereotypic beliefs about researchers as well that can be a barrier and make them less likely to work with researchers at times. So fundamentally, though, the way to, I think, the best way to work toward overcoming all of those is by building those relationships. Working with, having actual conversations with policymakers. As a scientist, you'll learn more about how to communicate effectively. You'll learn better about how to work on their timeline. You'll overcome stereotypes, et cetera, in both directions. And so, yeah, it's really all about kind of overcoming like a cultural barrier, essentially.
And I just want to follow up and not quite push back, but just point out that even though you are in this call right now with sort of the hat of a scientist, you're still a member of a community, a parent, like you should bring all of that to your conversations. And when you're trying to build relationships, don't just come in with the perspective of like, oh, I'm a scientist or a policymaker, and like that's where our interaction is. There are other ways to interact. And so to remember to bring all of those facets of yourself when you're trying to build engagement.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Shannon. I totally second that. I've had a couple of colleagues at the EPA who literally told me that they were surprised that I could do something other than speak to glassware. So I think there is definitely a disconnect and definitely barriers to sort of get over, because we're all here, we can all communicate, and we're all working on those skills as well. So totally understand that. I do want to give everyone time in breakout rooms, but I want to end with one final question in our big group together. So from each of your perspectives and from each of your respective organizations, what is the one thing that you would recommend each trainee do tomorrow, like an actionable step that they can take to engage at the local level, whether that's clicking on a link, whether that's reaching out to a representative, something like that? And we can start with Shannon.
Yeah, so you kind of already said it. We always recommend reaching out to a representative or any policy actor. So I guess the first step is identifying a policy actor who, essentially anyone who is working on or has the ability to make whatever change you want to see. Identify that person. That might be a legislator, another elected official, might be an agency staffer, might be a civic organization that's working on that topic. Identify a broader area of policy actor who would have that kind of power, and then identify an actual individual, their email address, send them an email asking to meet with them. I think asking for just a 30-minute meeting sometime in the next 2 weeks is the typical script that I put in these emails, and you would be surprised how many people say yes to that. And then just once you have a meeting with them, you can take the opportunity to share, what it is that you want to share, but also ask questions about what do your policy efforts currently look like on this topic area? How would a researcher be most helpful to you? And go from there.
Thank you, Shannon. Taylor?
Sure. I'm going to challenge everybody to identify a public meeting and just go and listen. You don't have to deliver public comments, but just listen to what your fellow residents have to say about a slate of topics that they also are there to weigh in on. And I think it's a really powerful learning opportunity and moment if you haven't been able to go before. And I think it does help shape how you envision potentially delivering comments at a certain point, or again, those one-on-one meetings with your representative. You know more what they're hearing from others, and you can therefore be ready for some of the questions, potential rebuttals, all that. So it's a really unique and fun experience. I encourage y'all to do that.
Seems like a good way to practice those listening skills as well. Jeff, what is your one recommendation that trainees do tomorrow?
Pay attention. What's going on in your world? I know it's hard when you get focused on lab. I'm assuming everybody here is working in a lab in some capacity, but like what's happening around you when you step outside that lab? And again, sort of being just a citizen, a member of a community, like, are there no curb cutouts on your street? Is that a problem? Is there no shade at the bus shelter? Just like things you might have not paid attention to. just keep your eyes and ears open.
Great. Well, thank you to our panelists for our broad discussion. So now we will keep that momentum going in our respective breakout rooms. And we recommend to the trainees just think about discussing how you can get involved, think about what they've been talking about so far, maybe bounce some ideas off of the speakers, or get tips on how to come up with a good idea for public engagement. And then we will reconvene in about 25 minutes. So I believe Lauren is going to open up those breakout rooms for you all.
And you should be able to choose your room, but I know not everyone can do that with their Zoom. So let us know and we can help place you. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your conversations with our panelists. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Karina just to wrap us up quickly.
Thanks, Lauren. Yes, hope you all had good sessions in your breakout rooms and got to ask a lot of questions. And thank you everyone for a wonderful discussion today. I think we've learned a lot about the kinds of skills that we should be honing to engage at the local level and what the value of engagement at the local level is, not just for your own careers, but also for your respective communities. And thank you to our incredible panelists today and to Lauren and Moraima for making everything run smoothly. And you all should be sure to reach out to the speakers if you have more questions. And I'll now pass it over to Lauren to wrap it up. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. If you can join me in a virtual round of applause for our panelists and for Karina, I would really appreciate it. And that's a wrap. So that's the finish of our 9 formal sessions. And we look forward to seeing you all at our 10th session for our pitch competition and celebration. We'll wrap everything up there. All right, and you'll get an email from me with some more logistics and everything. But if not, in the meantime, reach out. Let me know how I can help support. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Bye.